Hi, so this is the second part of the talk this evening. And this is really my first real project that I've done that specifically focuses on biodiversity. It was shot in 2021, so we were mid-pandemic. We had just come back to our house in Italy. It's about April. So you can imagine the grass has been growing for the last few months. And we decided to be part of the No Mow May program to really encourage the insect life in our garden. We actually, when we bought this house 3 years ago, there was quite a lot of pests and diseases in the various fruit trees and nut trees that we had on the plot. And so we were looking to see whether actually by increasing the number of pollinators on the site, that would potentially have an impact on the health of some of the plants on the site as well. So by not mowing the garden, I suddenly realized, before I go, into that, I've forgotten I'd put this slide in at the last minute, just to give you an idea of where we are. This little place here is our house. We actually have a ruin just at the bottom of the drive here. The fascinating thing for me about this particular photo is that until 50 years ago, everything on this photo would have been open pasture. There's been a huge amount of rural depopulation in this area and urbanization. And actually, since that time, it's a very steep hill and it's got terraces going all up the hill. And until, as I say, 50 years ago, it was all either under grain or hay meadows, and the hay being described as the local petrol station, because it provided all the fuel for the horses and donkeys and livestock down in the valleys below. But what we actually find is you can see the progression of the forest going up the hill, and it's been planted by the jays and the squirrels that we constantly see around the house. And when I was as I started looking a bit more closely at what was happening on the lawn, I became utterly fascinated by what I was seeing. And I decided I wanted to explore that as part of a photographic project. And it was the sheer diversity of species that I was starting to see coming through. But I didn't want to just take photos of what I was seeing. So I basically put myself in the mind of an ant and decided to look at this world through his eyes or her eyes. And so I basically got down on my hands and knees and started crawling through the grass to take the images. And it was utterly revelationary. It was like walking into a different world and a new cosmos. I had no idea, first of all, what was in this seed bank that as I stopped mowing the grass, suddenly came through and appearing on what I thought was just a lawn, but also the sheer beauty of the species that I was seeing. Now, some of them are just flowers that are encroaching from the borders into the lawn through the year, and others are in that livestock, in the seed bank itself. And it was just literally every week, it was a changing view and a changing extraordinary species that I was seeing. And I'm seeing them all the time, but this was through new eyes. Oh, sorry, just gone back there. And it's one of the things that anybody can do, because if you live in an apartment, you could put a window box on your windowsill and encourage these pollinators to come along. You can, if you've got a garden, you could just turn over a small area of that garden to a wild garden. You could start speaking to your neighbors and discussing how you could create corridors so the wildlife can move, be it the pollinators over the top of the fences moving quite freely. But what about putting a little hole in the bottom of the fence so a hedgehog can crawl through and go from garden to garden? So it's not just about individuals, but about communities working together to see if we can create habitats for the species. And this is really what this project was setting out to do. But what I actually found as I started looking not just in the garden, this is the hill behind our house, and it's an unbelievable hay meadow. And if I zoom out from the previous shot that I showed you, you can still see here the little red heart, that's our house. And then there's a very steep climb up about 200 meters to this open pasture that goes right up to the top of the hill, Monte Guardia Bella, at about 1,200 meters. You can see here on the southern slopes, that forest creeping its way up to the top of the hill. And conversely, on the northern slopes, you actually here, you have very different forests, because these are ancient forests full of chestnuts and older mother trees, the chestnuts being the source of flower for the entire area. And so they were nurtured over hundreds of years. There's one in a valley two valleys away that actually, legend has it, Napoleon planted, and it's got a little plaque on it to that effect. And this is where they're drawing their wood from. They're not clear felling. They're just taking out the species the individual trees to supply the fuel for the house. So this is an entire ecosystem that's serving not just the individuals here, but also the people in the towns and villages. Now, it's also a very natural system. This is the biggest piece of farm machinery that I could find, and it basically is a hay dryer. But I call it a poop and pee fertilizer system, because it's just low density cattle that are grazing the meadows. And conversely, so they're putting the nutrients into the ground, but because there's been no fertilizers or pesticides put on the hay meadow provides all the nutrients, the varying nutrients that the cows need. So they have no additional supplements in their annual feedstock, and that's summer and winter, because it's all held in the different herbs, etc., that are on site. So now, just before we go into this, sorry. So this next section, we're just going to come into, just so you don't have to listen to me all the time, is a little section that I've put together of some of the species that I saw on the hillside through that summer. There's a soundtrack accompanying it, so you may need to turn up your volume just to hear it. That's the sounds of our garden, actually. The birds and everything else that you hear are from the garden. And so I'll let you look at that, and we will join you in just a couple of minutes. You don't need to go anywhere. This is just going to play through. So I'll leave you in peace and mute myself for a few minutes.
Ted, as you've muted yourself, it's also muted the audio.
Apologies. Excellent. So just noting a mistake in one of the quotes there, it was the use of glyphosate fertilizers. That was 2004 to 2014. That was a decade, not to 2024, which would be a little more tricky. So just one thing that I wanted to say, I mentioned a little bit earlier on that we had these pests in our fruit trees. Now, I don't know whether I'm just being romantic, Ted, but after 2 years of doing no mow May, I think I have seen far more bees and pollinators in our garden. And indeed, we've had the best crop of fruit with far less pests and diseases seen on the trees. Now, I don't know whether that's been a climatic thing that's just unusual this year, and only time will tell. But I like to think that it's because we've been encouraging more diverse pollinators in that actually also feed and create a balance within the system. So yes, that's just in my heart, I've had a very good crop of plums, is what I'm trying to say, and the peaches are delicious. So just before we go on to the next section, Janie, did we have any comments come through?
Several thank yous for that minute of silence, Ted. So thank you for suggesting we take that break in your talk this evening. John Allison is saying, feeling my silence was for more than just the Queen, how the second Elizabethan age has coincided with much that turned out to be not such great progress after all. A comment from Francis Ainsley, lovely film, Ted. And yes, I would concur, absolutely beautiful images, and to the sound of you, the sound of your own garden is particularly beautiful. Yes, people just pop questions and comments into chat and I'll pick them up for Ted at appropriate points in his talk. Thanks.
Okay, so I think with that, thank you very much for those kind, generous comments. With that, I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the third part of tonight's talk.